Good morning, everyone. I'd like to open this Polk County Board of Commissioners meeting is March 3rd, 2026. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All commissioners are present. Copy of the agenda is on the back table. And looking for comments for not on this agenda. Yes, please come up. Name and address for the record, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Chip North, 14908 Ferns Corner Road, Monmouth, zip code. I'm here to share with you an experience I had, but first I want to say that several months ago, I sat in this room and listened to a very thorough report from the Polk County Resource Center over there at Independence on the S-curve. And I feel I had some gut feelings about it when I heard the report, but I tried to remain neutral in my thoughts about that. And then as a PCP, a precinct committee person here in Polk County, I spent a lot of time talking to voters and potential voters and trying to register people to vote and listening to people's stories. And several weeks ago, I was afforded the opportunity to speak with a woman who was 2 months behind on her rent. I didn't know this woman. She just opened up and shared this. 2 months behind on her rent, had no food in her house. And she was unemployed at the time due to a toxic work environment. She left on her own accord. Very proud woman, smartly dressed, business attire, laptop. She's working diligently on her laptop. And she shared with me a story about that resource center that troubled me as a citizen of this great county. And that was that she walked into that resource center and asked for food, which I was under the impression that anyone could walk in and get a box of food if they were hungry. Well, apparently not if you're a white female dressed in attire that is professional. She was flatly refused service of any kind in that place. And I thought as commissioners, you would want to hear that story. I don't know her. I did get a contact information from her, but I don't know her. But that story troubled me, and I wanted to share it with you this morning, just so that the next time you're in contact or in conversation with these people, you might ask them, do you have to be an illegal alien to get service from these people, or can you walk in there as an American citizen on hard times and get a little assistance? Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, looking for approval of agenda.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimous. Approval of minutes for February 24th, 2026.
Moved. Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimous. Next up is Opportunity Zones 2.0. So we have John Lagarza.
Hey, good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here this morning to present. Under and I have some slides to go over. We've been working with Business Oregon to get the awareness out on the opportunity zones. As you recall, about 10 years ago, there was Opportunity Zones 1.0. This is the 2.0 program. It's really to be able to try and drive dollars into rural areas. And I think you'll find the presentation helpful for the county commission here today. There's some census tracts, and do we have the opportunity to share our PowerPoint there?
Can you share the screen?
Yep. Perfect. All right. Thank you, Andre, if you want to go through there, and we'll happy to take some questions at the end here. If you got some in the middle too, just let us know.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, John, for the pass. So in short, today's presentation will focus on OZ 2.0 and specifically how the program differed from OZ 1.0. So within this, our goal since OEDA, we did a bit of a roundtable around opportunity zones. But what we learned during OEDA is a lot of rural counties across the state didn't have the capacity to understand OZs, how they might actually help their communities, and capitalize on these areas to essentially attract future investment that stays within their community. So our goal has to sort of been to raise awareness within commission meetings, within council meetings across the state about what are OZs, how do they work, and sort of how is Oregon approaching OZs as a whole. So within this, one of the resources that we'd like to point you to is the Business Oregon webinar that we co-produced with them that has just been launched on their website last week. So if you want to learn more from the Business Oregon side, who will be overseeing the sort of nomination process of eligible census tracts, please go to their website. It's Business Oregon's Opportunity Zones. If you just Google that, it'll be the first page that you get to. And you could watch the webinar where we sort of talk about OZs, different than today's call, but in a little more detail in a different way. We talk about changes from OZ 1.0 to 2.0. We talk about some case examples of how OZ 1.0 were used across the state, including within rural communities. And we also talk about some of the deadlines with the Business Oregon team. So if you're interested in learning more, feel free to go and check this out. It's posted on YouTube, so you can watch the video whenever you'd like online. So within this, the opportunity from Opportunity Zones is essentially, it's an economic development tool that allows you to attract investment within your community. It's ultimately a tax incentive that aims to encourage private investors to make investments within your community. And in OZ 1.0, we saw more than $160 billion of private equity invested in communities across the nation. So within this, that's a lot of money. But what we learned within OZ 1.0 is most of this money flowed into more urban census tracts in urban areas. However, one of the goals in OZ 2.0 is on this right side of the graph to sort of even the playing field. So how do rural communities get more of this money other than just urban census tracts? So within this, OZ 2.0 aims to sort of solve some of these challenges with OZ 1.0, where more money went into urban communities as opposed to rural communities. So within this, if we compare sort of the outcomes and the programs around OZ 1.0 versus 2.0, is OZ 1.0 was a temporary program. It wasn't permanent within the tax code, so it was always subject to go away, and there were some challenges to invest in OZs towards the end. Also, there was a bit of a broader eligibility around census tracts. OZ 2.0 is more restrictive on the census tracts that are eligible, and we'll talk specifically about what that might look like for your county. Also, there wasn't a rule bonus for investing, so that resulted in the previous graph where investors were attracted to communities that were more urban, had already more established investment markets. So there was sort of a uniform incentive that didn't direct more money to rural communities. However, in OZ 2.0, the program now becomes permanent, where new designations will happen every 10 years. It's now a permanent feature of our tax code. But this is important. Your previous census tracts that were eligible for OZ 1.0 may no longer be eligible for OZ 2.0. So there's a new nomination process that the county should be on the lookout for, and there'll essentially be new census tracts that are eligible. In addition, there's a rural incentive boost. So if you are a designated rural census tract, and an investor is investing through a qualified rural opportunity fund, there is additional tax benefits now for them to make that investment. So it's a much more competitive process to get census tracts designated because there'll be less designations, but there is substantial benefits from a financial perspective for these rural census tracts that will be nominated. So how the process will work is, in short, the ACS data, which is the American Community Survey data, has now been released online, and Treasury is going to certify a finalized list, hopefully in March, of the eligible census tracts. We're going to give you a preview of the ones that we believe will be eligible within your county. And then thereafter, Business Oregon will oversee a state nomination process where you'll be able to hopefully submit an application for a census tract that you feel merits investment. And we'll talk a little bit about what we think makes a good designation. Then the governor's office will actually designate. So it's the governor's office role to submit these recommendations to Treasury. And then once these are certified by Treasury at the beginning of 2027, essentially qualified opportunity funds could then invest within these to realize the tax benefits. So this is a bit of the process to actually get your census tracts nominated. And more information will be provided by Business Oregon. You could talk to your RDO about the nomination process. They're going to sort of oversee that. Within this, why might an investor, let's say I'm an investor, you're an investor, why might an investor actually put their money in an opportunity fund as opposed to another investment vehicle, the stock market? So what happens from the investor's point of view? Let's say an investor realized a capital gain by selling a business, by selling stock, by selling a property. What they could choose to do is they could choose to roll some of those proceeds from the sale into a new investment within 180 days within one of these funds. If they do that, they get to defer their capital gains for 5 years. So rather than owing capital gains tax once you sort of sell that asset within the end of that tax year, you could defer your capital gains liability for up to 5 years. And then when that bill comes due, you'll have a reduced amount that you owe, depending on whether you made the investment in a rural or urban within a fund that is rural or urban. So you essentially get a reduction of that tax due within year 5. But the most important benefit isn't this reduction, but it is if an investment stays within one of these funds for more than 10 years, any appreciation to that investment is tax-free. So essentially, the goal is to attract investment into communities that stays in the community for a long term. So if you think about this tool, it's really a tool to attract long-term investors that want to keep their money within your community. Is there any questions at this point? I'll be happy to answer them or continue. So in short, your responsibility is to think about the census tracts that could be eligible, to coordinate with other community members on which ones you might want to nominate, and sort of think about what is the landscape for investment within these census tracts. Is it a lot of EFU? Is there a lot of opportunities for development or not? So to strategically, because these census tracts aren't defined by municipal borders, they're defined by the ACS, they're all within counties, but they could have weird geographies where they're not always as attractive as another one might be for investment. Business Oregon will oversee this nomination process. The governor will submit recommendations to Treasury. And then you as a county don't have to actually create funds once they're created. You only try to attract investment to your community, but fund operators will be responsible for actually collecting that investment, for ensuring compliance with IRS regulations. And the IRS hopefully will provide additional data in this round about how many jobs are created, what type of investments are made in local communities, which is also a change in OZ 2.0. So within this, if we look at your county, you have 4 eligible census tracts. I'm going to zoom into these areas in a second. But in short, when you're looking at these areas on the map that I show you, think about to what extent do these areas have developable land? Do they have existing infrastructure capacity? Is there strong community support for investment and development? And are there sort of shovel-ready projects that are encouraging or that could use this incentive to sort of fill the gap? So it's important to also note that out of all the census tracts within Oregon that are eligible, only 25% will be selected. So if we just go by numbers, if you have 4, just using general math, you'd be likely to nominate at least 1 and get it selected. However, remember, every county, every city might be participating in this process. So it will be a competitive process where probably more census tracts will be requested than the ones that are actually transmitted to Treasury. So it's important to think about which census tracts here are the most competitive for future investment. So within the south portion of your county, you have Independence, Monmouth, Dallas. So you could sort of see those census tracts that are eligible here. These are 2 census tracts that are eligible in the south portion of your county. And then within the West Salem area, you also have 2 census tracts that are likely eligible. The final list will be released by Treasury hopefully by mid to late March. But using the ACS data, this is what most industry experts in our team has thought about what might be eligible within your county. So these are the two specific areas that are going to be eligible under OZ 2.0, likely eligible for your county. And then under OZ 1.0, you could sort of see the areas that were previously designated and could currently accept investment under OZ 1.0. So you can see already that the map looks a bit different, possibly for OZ 2.0 and the census tracts that you can nominate in the future. So
John, I'm
with
sorry
that,
to interrupt.
yep, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. Am I seeing that that Dallas area is no longer eligible under 2.0? That's
Correct.
1.0, that's 2, okay.
Correct. So it will be this where it's more in the downtown corridor plus out east towards the Lockrell node.
Gotcha. Okay.
So in short, yeah, this is one of the things too, when we talk with a lot of rural communities or communities across the state, they learn that they'll essentially have to rethink about this a little because either the census tract boundaries changed or the eligible criteria got stricter where some of these previous ones are no longer eligible. And there's also the removal of the adjacency rule where you can't get a census tract that's adjacent to one that's eligible. That's no longer allowed in this OZ 2.0. So there's just a lot stricter requirements around the census tracts that can be certified for this program. So one of the things we also get asked a lot by communities is how do you make these successful? So as part of our outreach after OEDA to developers and investors, we've learned that essentially it's important to not only see these areas as the only tool that you have there. You have to think about what does the project pipeline look like in that area? What other types of incentives do you also have within those areas? So when we talk with investors and developers, a lot of the times, especially for rural projects, we found that other incentives were also required. So was the project in the urban renewal area? Did they receive urban renewal funds in addition to sort of using this tax benefits? A lot of the times for these projects to sort of happen in rural communities, you required another incentive in place other than OZ alone. Also, you required infrastructure, sort of parcel readiness. We saw these projects happen in downtown corridors where there's already infrastructure connections, where there's infill capacity to develop, and strong market demand. So when you're looking at these census tracts, if on the right side here, I think it's important to think about to what extent do all of these things line up within a census tract. And the more that they do, probably the more competitive the census tract might be for nomination. Lastly, one of the things that we recommend to all communities, especially looking at how OZ 1.0 went, is it's important to analyze and build this case to get a census tract nominated. But we found a lot of communities, once they were nominated, didn't have the economic development support and capacity to sort of attract investment into them. So you really have to think about how do you continually promote these as zones for investment? How do you raise awareness within local developers, within business communities about this incentive? Because we find a lot of businesses don't even know about this incentive. So with it, it's important to also articulate this as one of the economic development tools that the county has, because a lot of these tracts, as you could saw with the municipal boundaries, also sometimes fall outside of the municipal boundary. So how does the county sort of advertise opportunity zones as a tool in which they could attract new businesses or developers to the community? So with that, I'll stop my sharing and happy to answer any questions you might have around OZ 2.0 and how it differs from OZ 1.0.
Any questions?
Thanks for the presentation, Andre. First of all, which definition of rural is the federal government using? I worry that we're going to be capturing this in the Salem metropolitan statistical area. I want to make sure that's not the case with the new likely tracks.
Yeah, that's a great question. I was wondering with your two, I was thinking about it during the presentation because we've been talking to a lot of rural counties and most of them had rural census tracts. I want to just double confirm. So those ones in West Salem would be likely urban,
Right.
likely not rural, whereas the ones in Monmouth and Dallas and Independence, those two would be the rural incentives.
Okay, that's helpful. And another question, would I understand the capital gains for the federal tax system would be potentially reduce? Would that be true for the state capital gains tax
Yeah.
as well?
Our understanding is that the state hasn't adopted any policy around that, so I have no awareness of that actually being deferred on a state level.
Noted. Okay. And then you mentioned that somebody manages these qualified opportunity funds, where in 1.0 that was something. What is that governance structure?
So
And
there's
does each census tract have its own fund also?
No, so
Okay.
it's a private individual or a company can set up a fund, and in short, it's sort of a fund that is able to attract investment, and there's certain requirements of the investment they attract that has to be deployed. So it's privately managed, and then they do have to report to the IRS on an annualized basis and fill out a certain form. So there's two forms, they just switched the form, but in short, they will submit the form to the IRS. And the goal behind OZ 2.0 on the federal level, there was a lot of criticism around OZ 1.0 and transparency of data. And the goal between OZ 2.0 is to make this data eventually accessible to the communities in which these investments are taking place. So as a county, you should hopefully have access to in the future what types of jobs were created in these zones through these investments, how much money were specifically attracted within each census tract, whereas that data is not available for public access or even access at all today from the IRS.
Appreciate that. Just have a couple more questions and I'll hand it over to my colleagues. I'm curious if the governor's office has isolated priorities to make those executive decisions. And then the next question I have is, how is 2.0 stricter in its determination of eligible census tracts? Is that AMI? So however you want to take those.
Yeah, so the first one, great question for your RDO and sort of business organ. I think business organ will oversee the nomination process, but the governor's office has final discretion to nominate tracts with Treasury. So it's really the governor's office within the legislation that makes the nominations. So that'd be great questions for both of those or your RDO. For eligibility requirements, it's stricter. So the AMI was reduced. In addition, there was a new restriction around poverty rates. So in the business organ webinar, we talk a little bit about it, but part of the change was also to do with some communities that were had high student populations were eligible before, but maybe didn't require the same amount of investment. So there were strategic choices to tighten eligibility, and overall across the nation, eligibility was reduced. And then out of the eligible census tracts, only 25% can be selected. So it's a much more competitive process as a whole, where Oregon will see like a reduction of about 33% of eligible opportunity zones by the end of this.
Appreciate that. And that just reminds me again, I appreciate this very much. One concern I have is that, obviously there's a rural incentive on the back end to reduce the capital gain tax, but on the front end, there's all sorts of incentives to encourage urban development. And I know Oregon's running out of developable land everywhere. I do worry that that's actually a disincentive for rural investment because of the need for other, urban renewal or other incentives that may not be available. And then I think, one last question, I'm sorry. Let's say these are nominated. I assume I'm hearing from you that counties and cities could work together to create sort of a pitch of why these census tracts could be selected. Is that kind of our role at this point? You don't need counties to formally say yes to this. You just are asking us, hey, you may want to create a good, an attractive package for Business Oregon to make that recommendation to the governor's office. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, and Business Oregon will release the final scoring criteria in the application, hopefully by the end of this month once they get through the process. But one of the things we've always heard since OEDA is this is going to be a more collaborative process where hopefully public entities are working with the market to sort of put the right people in the room to make these decisions and make compelling cases that will eventually be assessed.
Thanks. That's all I've got for now.
Commissioner Polk?
I have two questions. First of all, who are you and what is your role?
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. So we're located in Wilsonville, Oregon. We provide fractional and economic and strategic planning with cities and counties, and we're also working put together for Business Oregon the webinar. So we work with a lot of rural counties and cities around the state here in the Pacific Northwest that really don't have full-time economic development or helps with strategic planning. So we fill that role for those governmental agencies.
Okay. So you get paid under contract to come out here and pitch this.
No, we're doing this. We're just trying to get awareness out there. We did some work and we helped the city of Dallas with some rezoning on the Lock Rail node there. Charlie Mitchell, their economic, and Brian. You got some great commercial and industrial opportunities in there. So just getting awareness out to the counties from this standpoint here. So.
Mm. The other thing is I see in your map that you've presented, a significant portion of two of those zones are exclusive farm use or exclusive farm use and forestry areas. So how do you pick opportunities for ag who should be exclusively in those areas?
I think one of the things I would suggest is maybe, think about setting up a quick, small, maybe, 5-member kind of advisory committee with your city managers, economic development people, and whoever handles it within the county, right? And look at those census tracts there and the land within them, and then who are the companies inside there, right? So a company can also set up an agriculture company like Simplot or someone that's in, the agriculture grain products could also be thinking about setting up an opportunity zone to invest in an agriculture area. But you would want to have some, even with SEDCOR, some boots on the ground conversations with those companies to see if this would be a benefit and attractive way to nominate that area versus maybe an industrial commercial area. So great conversation that needs to happen within your cities and counties around that opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
So I'm sorry if you said this. What is the timeline for those nominations? When are those due, I suppose?
I think yeah.
I can take it real quick. So Business Oregon aims to open their application process, hopefully by the end of this month, maybe next month. They are waiting for the final list from Treasury. With that, there'll be a nomination process. It will be accessible on the Business Oregon website. There'll be another webinar in mid to late March that you could sign up for to learn more about that nomination process, the scoring criteria. Thereafter, the recommendations from Business Oregon will be submitted to the governor's office, and then the governor's office has 90 days to submit them to Treasury, and then they'll actually come into effect in January of 2027. So hopefully Business Oregon will open the nomination process in late March or April.
Okay. Good. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having us.
Do we have any non-listed items?
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay. With that, we're adjourned.
Do you have one?
Oh, no, I was just kidding.